Okay, so today's talk is on beginning anew, which is it's like Buddhist conflict resolution of how to heal relationships and live in community. So it's probably a pretty useful teaching because, you know, inevitably in families where people are different, or in communities, or in marriages, or in monasteries, there will be conflict. So, because, you know, people are not the same, people want different things, and also sometimes people misunderstand each other, you know. So one of the first practices that we do with beginning anew is coming back to ourselves. And you know, because it's just so easy to just be reactive immediately and, you know, be like F off or kind of snap reaction. And that's usually where we do most of the harm. And the people we harm are usually the ones closest to us, you know, when we've lost our temper and we've reached the end of our rope, you know, like children can put you in that state of semi-insanity because they just don't let up. And then it's really good to come back to yourself, you know, to just take a minute before you react, you know, and examine what's going on in your mind. I mean, obviously with children that's not always possible because they're there waiting for you. You can't just go and meditate for 15 minutes, but maybe you could go for a walk, you know, depending on, or you just redirect their attention to something a bit more positive, or, you know, you have a conversation with it, but as the adult, you're the one who has to kind of try and stay calm and not, you know, lose it. See, you know, our emotions are a bit like a fire. When our emotions are contained in the fireplace of mindfulness and they're under our control, they can keep us warm and they can be nice and they can be skillful and useful. Like even anger, when it's contained and when it's understood, why am I angry? Maybe a boundary is being crossed, maybe a need's not being met. But when our emotions are out of control, like a fire, it can destroy everything in our life, including the people around us. So that's why we, you know, come back to ourselves first and say, why do I feel this way? What is the root of this? What is the need that's not being met? Is my perception correct? Did they really mean this? Or is this how I perceive that they... So sometimes it's good to then go to the person and say, you know, how did you mean what you said? Because this is how I interpret what you said. Yeah. And so there are 4 stages. The first stage is when you begin anew with someone. Usually they say every 2 weeks perhaps to just light a candle and meet and sit in a circle and, you know, follow your breath for a few minutes and then talk about what's going on in the family, talk about what's going on in your relationship, and water some seeds of good qualities, you know, before you lay down what the need is. Sandwich. You know, like this week you did the dishes, or this week I appreciate that you didn't just snap like you have in the past, and you were you said some hard to hear things, but you said them in a way that was not aggressive and not full of blame. So I appreciate that. Or, you know, whatever, you know, I appreciate the love and the way you show up in our marriage, or that you've been diligently walking the dog and feeding the dog and you know, affectionate to your sister and brother, whatever. Or how supportive you are, you know, whatever. And then the second one is that you express your own regret about, like you examine yourself. Have I made mistakes? Have I done things unskillfully? You know, sorry I snapped at you the other day. Sorry I invalidated your feelings. You know, maybe I don't always understand you because we're quite different. Da da da. You know. Like this is how my parents did it to me, so I'm trying to do better, to learn better, more skillful patterns. And then number 3, we express our suffering, which is this is something men do a lot, like when you just offer advice without actually listening to the problem. You just try to fix it without actually understanding the nuance of the problem, how complex it is, or you don't check in and see if I just want you to listen instead of try and fix it, because it's something that can't be fixed easily. I just want comfort. So, you know, or when you express your problems with swearing, it makes me feel unsafe because you're being really aggressive, or whatever it is, you know. And do so in a way that is calm and not full of blame. Like, it's better to say, when you do this, I feel this, instead of, why are you doing this? You know, you're an idiot, or kind of to do it in a way that is as non-violent as possible, as not non-threatening as possible. And then number 4 is to ask for help. So, you know, I didn't make these children alone. I can't do all the housework and the emotional labor if you don't put any energy into it. I don't want to follow regressive gender patterns. You know, I don't want to resent you. I don't want to nag you. I would really like it if you would do these things without me having to ask to, you know, because you're a parent too, or whatever it is you need, you know. And it's like, it's because I love you and I respect you and I know you're capable of this that I'm asking you, you know. And yeah, so we do so without expecting them to change necessarily, without but just to keep the lines of communication open. And we do so with the awareness that we are different people. We may not always see things the same way, and that you have to let the other person have their own experience, emotions, point of view, and not necessarily demand that they just give you what you want, you know, that there's some compromise. But the good thing about beginning anew is that you don't build up resentment, and you don't bring up things from the past all the time, the same old thing, you know, and that you communicate what's going on. Yeah, a lot of people are afraid of conflict, and often people don't, like, it can lead to relationship fallouts because people don't handle conflict well. But you know, uncommunicated needs and resentment can build up over years and create great damage in relationships. So it's important to learn to communicate well with parents, like, and for children to see that modeled between their parents and in community. You know, even with teachers, it's really important, and in spiritual communities. Like, I've been in spiritual communities where there's a lot going on under the surface that nobody, even abuse, you know, where it's not communicated, you know, or somebody maybe isn't so good at picking up nonverbal cues, and people get annoyed with them, and they don't check in, you know, are you on the spectrum? Are you disabled? Do you, and just, you know, it's just a better idea to not assume others have the same life experience and ability to read cues that you do, you know, and just say, you know, this is what we do, this is how we do it, can you help? So first of all, you know, the first step, cultivating some peace, so that you don't just kind of go And with peace, we may remember why we love the other person. You know, it's nice to write a love letter about the other person, all the things you love about them, why you married them, the things you appreciate about them, and then put it in your drawer. And when you're feeling like, I'm just over this, you open the drawer and you look at the love letter and you're like, oh yeah, you know. Yeah, and you could even do it for yourself, you know, like when you're over yourself. Buddhists call it rejoicing, like they think of good deeds they've done in their life, just to feel a sense of happy and, you know, or, yeah. And yeah, and then we examine, you know, did I contribute to the situation? Because there's this habit, you know, we love to label people. Have you noticed that everybody on Facebook was once married to a narcissist? Yeah. They're a narcissist. Yeah. It's like someone disagrees with you, you're a narcissist. Like, wow, I didn't know there were so many sociopaths and psychopaths and narcissists walking around. Or somebody disagrees with you and suddenly, like, you're a bigot, you know. I mean, there are bigots, and there's nothing wrong with calling out bigotry, but not everybody who disagrees with you is a narcissist or a bigot. I find that that's actually very common in leftist circles, like this kind of authoritarian, dictatorial cancelling of, you know, you disagree with me, so you need to be cancelled, you need to be, you know. And look, there are people who probably should be cancelled and silenced, and it's not good, you know, but there are people who just have a more nuanced take on something or a different point of view, and by condemning them before you even give them a chance to explain themselves, you're not really helping them understand your point of view. I used to do that, like I'm a bit of an activist, and I used to feel the need to make people agree and accept my point of view, you know, like either you are on my side or you're wrong. And you're against me, you know. And what I've realized is it's so useless, because people have different experiences, and if real communication is going to take place, we both have to have a chance to speak and understand each other. And maybe there will be some things that we can agree on, and inevitably there will be things that we don't see the same, you know. Because I had this experience of someone insisting that I accept their point of view, and that if they weren't in the conversation, that the conversation was exclusionary, you know. And I was like, but I wasn't speaking to your demographic, it wasn't about you, so you can't insert yourself into every post or conversation. So giving the other person the freedom to have their own point of view and their own beliefs, and understand no one single person is the same as another. Yeah, so when we reflect and get a bit of space, we might realize, you know, this is a pattern from the past, this is trauma, I've been triggered. Or you might understand, like, wow, this person's kind of manipulative, or you know, and sometimes, like, we might realize we can't resolve the conflict because we're just really different people and we don't have the same values. So maybe we can meet up for coffee as acquaintances, but we'll never be bosom buddies. Or we've grown apart, you know, and that's something you've got to grieve. And sometimes you might actually initially not really like someone or understand them, and then you give them some space, and as time goes on, you start to appreciate and understand them and just let them be themselves. And I find that in the country more, because, like, I can't just cancel people because they're the only person within 5 kilometers that, you know, can fix my car, or help me cut firewood or put out the fire, or, you know, you've just got to be a bit more accommodating, yeah. Whereas in the city, you're like, you're more likely to find someone who likes what you like, you know. Yeah, so then, we look deeply and we listen in order to understand and not just to say our piece. So when you have a beginning anew, the person who needs to talk goes through these 4 phases, and they speak, and the other person doesn't interrupt or listen, just listens and doesn't offer advice, and tries to put down their prejudice and really just listen to the other person, because that can be healing in itself. These days we're so often just listening to wait for our response rather than really listening in order to understand, listen deeply. Yeah. So sharing our vulnerability, this is why I suffer, helps the other person to have empathy and to understand that their words and their actions have impact. Because often people who are wrapped up in their own feelings and point of view can't see the impact right in front of them, of what their thoughts and words are having. And you may mean something in a different way to the way it lands, So it's also good to kind of create an environment of peace and safety, so that the other person knows they're not going to be, it's not going to be violent, it's not going to be threatening, put a vase of flowers or a candle, make some tea, and try to be aware of what you're saying, so conscious, so that it's skillful, and share what's in your heart. And if you do something wrong, it's also good to express regret or apologize on a regular basis, so that way you don't have to make it a big heavy thing. But this kind of process does take quite a lot of work and skill, and in the beginning it might not be a bad thing to invite a friend to come and sit with you as well, just to make sure you don't end up kind of taking knives to each other or bringing up a whole bunch of other things from the past, and remain focused on the issue and try to come to a compromise, or depending on what it is, and sometimes you just come to the knowledge that like, we can fix this, I really, it's a small thing, or you just realize, wow, the division is even bigger than I thought, and you have to grieve that loss. For example, last week I just got some comments and an email from a friend that I put a lot of energy into, someone who was my student 5 years ago, and then they just kind of ghosted me, and I really liked them, so that and I counseled them, and I made a lot of effort, so I kind of missed them, and I felt sad when they ghosted me, and they didn't explain why. And then I just said, you can't just come out of nowhere and start commenting and pretend that nothing has happened. Why did you ghost me? And like, why did you end our friendship? And they were like, actually, it was at the time of Me Too. And as a socially engaged Buddhist, I was making a lot of posts about patriarchy and abuse by gurus. Not to say that this is like widespread in Buddhism, but it exists. And I guess at that time I was particularly triggered in making a lot of posts about Me Too and patriarchy in Buddhism, and and she was like, you're so angry, and I just came to Buddhism to find peace, so I didn't want to deal with that, so I just ghosted you, sorry. And but along with that, she said some other pretty devastating things, like we don't have to be friends, and none of us owe anybody anything anyway. And I was like, okay, so you don't really want to be friends anyway, and you don't really like what I value, and that was really hard to take. And then I was like, oh, and by the way, I'm quite ill. I have a disease that will eventually kill me. And she's like, okay, I'll pray for you. And I was like, so you've ended our friendship, you don't want to be friends with me, you don't really care about me, but you're going to pray for me. uh, um, so yeah, that was a bit kind of, yeah, that was hard. And I felt quite rejected. Because I know sometimes just by being yourself, you'll lose some friends. And by speaking, especially speaking about difficult issues people don't want to hear about, or being like an activist, being socially engaged, asking people for money for charities in India, or to sign a petition, or to address issues they feel are too big for them to address, you'll annoy people. And especially people who think Buddhist nuns should just shut up and be peaceful and happy and give them what they paid their money for. Don't challenge me. Just just talk about peace and love all the time. So yeah, I mean, I realized in that instance there was not a lot I could do to change what had happened, and to just accept that I felt pain and that I wasn't the right person to be her teacher or her friend, because I'm an engaged Buddhist and I'm not interested in being silent on these issues. So yeah, and that happens, so when you open the Pandora's box of conflict, it's hard. I mean, I think this is why people are, especially Buddhists, are afraid of anger. They're afraid of conflict, so they try to avoid it. And they often talk about how bad anger is, But I do think anger has its place, because anger can really show people, hang on, I'm being abused. I'm not being respected, But it's about how you manage those feelings, and whether they become resentment or toxic, or and whether the perception is a misperception, like you get these people that harm others, become violent based on a misperception or a sense of entitlement, rather than an understanding of like when there is understanding, when you really understand why someone has done what they've done, usually anger disappears, and you understand. You may still see that it's a terrible thing and you need to cut that person out of your life because they're abusive or whatever, they're not good for you, but there is some peace, there is some resolution, because you understand, and usually what is underneath the anger is hurt, and violation. Yeah, so I think we have to learn to be comfortable with those feelings, and I think it's not necessarily a bad thing to be assertive as well, especially in a case where an adult has harmed a child or has done something wrong. But it's a question of when does that become abusive or kind of, toxic. So it's like establishing that circle of safety and mindfulness around, and especially with a marriage, it's like you got to live with each other for a long time. So you don't want to, you've got to be really careful about how you frame these things, so that there is some room for rebuilding what is between you. In terms of conflict resolution, usually they say there is 5 points. There's identifying the source of the problem, like what is the issue, exploring that. And then second is going beyond the conflict and identifying the barriers. And then 3 is establishing a common goal. And 4 is explore how the goal can be reached. And 5 is developing an agreement. So for conflict resolution to work, and even nonviolent communication, both parties have to have good intention. Because sometimes conflict resolution can be used by the party with more privilege to tone police the oppressed person, especially people of color. That's often why they say they don't like nonviolent communication, because they just feel like they're being muzzled in terms of their needs and their frustration with, casual racism and institutional injustices and so forth. And this happens a lot with the gender equality dialogue as well. Like, you just start saying, this is what women need, this is what women experience, and men are like, can you beg more nicely, please? Yeah. And like, you'll ask in 100 nice ways and they still won't get it. So in the end, you just have to be like, oh, and they're like, why are you so angry? And it's like, have you not just asked me in 100 ways, like, because you're not getting it. Yeah. You're not hearing me. So, and that's another thing with conflict resolution. Sometimes you just realize that the people in power don't want to give their power, so there has to be some kind of measures, like a strike or a protest, or various means, and depending on how bad the injustice is, the measure of what you'll take to get what you need. And in ancient Buddhist texts, in Buddhist communities, like a monastic community, people have this idea that we're all just very happy and very nice to each other, but really, if you take a whole bunch of different people of different ages who probably don't have a lot in common except that they like meditation, and not necessarily because they're peaceful, but because they're not peaceful, they need it. Or what you have in common is a shaved head and wearing red, but that might be it. So to put those people together, there's going to be friction, and that's part of the growth. The messy bits, no mud, no lotus. The messy bits are what makes us grow. But it's a question of, can we transform ourselves so that we, don't make life for each other hell, basically. I mean, relationships are a great ground for learning, whether they're romantic or familial or spiritual in nature, or just friendships. But the ways that they describe resolving conflict in monastic communities were, first they would gather everybody in the group together, and they would ask people to witness what had happened, and they would give both parties a chance to speak, and then they would talk about what are the vows that we have, and for example, non-violence or simplicity, or what are the teachings around this issue. Sometimes it could be a point of philosophical difference. I believe Buddha taught this, and you believe Buddha taught that, and then there would be a like an elder or the community would come to a consensus, a communal decision, and both parties had to accept that. And then they had to, they called it putting straw over mud. They had to build the bridge back to each other and accept the decision of the community. Hopefully the community, is compassionate enough to make a wise decision, and to accept the decision and not and apologize if necessary, and not keep bringing up the past, basically. And then keep going. But that's easier said than done. Sometimes people might realize this isn't the community for me, and sometimes they might just be like, I just need a bit of space from that person, so they hang out with other people in the monastery. And sometimes after many years people become good friends, or they just have a kind of working relationship. They don't socially hang out together, they just do the work and try to be civil with each other, so it's not always the wonderful understanding and heart-opening transformation you hope it will be, and sometimes it is. Yeah. Like I Sister Chan Kong, Thich Nhat Hanh's kind of disciple, she's a woman. She was a social worker before she ordained, and she's saved a lot of marriages. She's a Zen nun, and she often will sit down with people and they'll be in tears, you know, saying what they need, and she'll be like, do you hear this person? Do you hear what they need? And do you hear what your partner needs? And do you see how much they love you? And they're like, and they hug, and they, you know, they have that healing, that heart opening thing. So yeah, and sometimes, like, for example, with my mother and I are very different people. I've tried to understand her more over the years and why she needs what she needs. And, you know, sometimes I think what she needs is very reasonable, and sometimes I'm like, this is kind of nuts. But I love her and she's given me a lot, so I have to make a compromise, you know. And I'm sure she's had to make compromises over the years too. So we can't, you know, we don't fully understand each other. We're not the same. We need different things, but we have the common ground where we meet, and then we have the boundaries where we're like, okay, now it's time to be alone, and I can do this much, but I can't do everything, you know. So this is my my talk on beginning anew. So once again, the 4 stages of beginning anew are watering good qualities in your loved one. Number 2 is expressing any shortcomings or regrets you have. Number 3 is expressing our suffering, and number 4 is asking for help. And there was just one more thing, and that is about purifying your own regrets and bad karma. In Tibetan Buddhism, there is something called the 4 powers, which is, number 1 is support, which is whereby you ask a source higher than you for help. It's a bit like the 12-step program, isn't it? You realize you're helpless and you ask a higher form for help, you know. In Buddhism, there is no God, but we believe all beings have a pure nature. So we ask the Buddha, who is an archetype of that purity, because the Buddha is just a human being who got awakened. We say Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, meaning compassionate spiritual warriors and saints. Please bear witness to me. I've done these things that I regret, and you da 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 da. In my case, da 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 da. And then you express your remorse, which is number 2, and then you do an antidote. So, for example, if you were killing, you might set some animals free in the place that they're meant to go, like rescue fish and put them back in the sea or whatever, like making sure it's where they're meant to go. Or, you know, rescue an animal, or make offerings, or volunteer at a soup kitchen. Like we have this mantra that we say, which is the mantra of purification, Om Vajrasattva Hum. But there's a whole practice that goes with that. We imagine this being of light coming and purifying and clearing away our negative emotions as we, you know, say, and this beautiful white light coming and clearing away all the, you know, bad deeds and negative karma. And people say, well, isn't that a bit like, you know, kind of the Catholic Church with indulgences? Like, I'll just pay you some money and you say a prayer for me, and then I'll go back and be a shitty person all over again. But in Buddhism, we say if your leg of moral conduct is broken, it won't heal so well the second time. So, you know, and then you, after you've imagined this practice of, or you've done some kind of deed to compensate, or, you know, you've done this purification practice, you could send them loving kindness, whatever. And a lot of the time we need to realize that we might have done something in a state of mind where we were deluded, you know, as well. We need to have compassion for ourselves. But we do this resolution where, like, okay, I'll try not to do this action again, you know. So, like, sometimes people might set a realistic thing, like if they're trying to give up cigarettes, they might be like, okay, for 24 hours I won't smoke, or you know, for 3 days I'll try not to swear, or, you know, I'll only have 1 glass, I won't have 5, or whatever, you know. And, you know, whatever it is, they try to moderate or even, you know, if it's like thoughts, you know, like I'll try to be aware that that is what is driving me, and go to a therapist, or not be so hard on myself, or whatever, you know. So that is the practice of the 4 supports of purifying unskillful karma and expressing regret and healing to not do it again. And that practice we often do a lot because mostly, you know, the mind is like it's like carving wood. You know, you get in the habit of doing something. The mind is habit forming. So it takes a while to break old habits and create new thought patterns and new habits. Yeah. So, do you have any questions? I talked a lot, didn't I? Got to take it all in, digest it.
It takes me a while to process things.
Yeah.
I struggle with my relationship with my mother.
Right.
She was, you know, the perfect mother in that typical sense of she'd always bake. She was always baking, and you know, biscuits and cakes. And she stayed at home, so she would walk us to school every day. She did parent help at school, and she'd always help at school. And you know, I mean, she certainly gave up a lot to look after us.
Mm.
But she has, I don't know, she has very strong viewpoints, and she doesn't mind sharing them in front of the kids. One of which is that all men are bastards. So that, you know, since my son was 5, he's heard from her that all men are bastards. Although she did move to America when he was about 8, so it's been a relief to have that distance.
Right.
But yeah, she certainly means well, and I know she does. But it's very difficult to explain why sometimes
That's not skillful.
her expressions are not.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
But yeah, she does. She genuinely means well. She just doesn't understand. She doesn't seem to understand why the way she's phrasing certain things is not so good for her.
Like, and you've tried to say, when you say this, I feel this way, or this is the impact I
I've
have.
never worded it in that sense. Yeah. So that will be something to
Yeah. I had this person in my life who was very good at delivering devastating, blunt truths, but could not accept them in return. And sometimes I wonder if they were on the spectrum, or, you know, they just couldn't quite pick up the cue of the effect they were having, and then they would be like, why do people cut me out of their life? Why do they reject me? So yeah, it's not easy. It's that fine line, once again, between allowing someone to be who they are and also understanding the impact you're having. I think I've had that problem of just understanding, you know, I'm very much, well, this is what I think, and this is meaningful to me, and, you know, but just kind of having empathy and understanding people can, based on their history, they could be very sensitive to what you're talking about. Maybe that with my friend, for example, she was very sensitive to hearing about Me Too and rape and all of that. So they may not take it the way you intended. And maybe they didn't have a good model for communication. I think that was the case with the person that was in my life, like a blunt axe.
Yeah.
Yeah, so